Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. It's so great to have you on this interview. And we're doing a series called Talking Story. And of course, talking story is something we say in Hawaii that indicates how important relationships are and how important conversations are. So we sit together, we talk, we listen, we get to know each other's backgrounds, life stories, and culture, everything. And so we're doing the series Talking Story, Conversations with Sisters and Brothers in Communities of Color. And this is the first interview that we're doing, and I'm so glad that we can have so many different people join us in these interviews. And my first guest today, I'm so happy to have on board Dr. Dwight Radcliff. It's interesting that we met when we were participating in a conference on Zoom on anti-racism, and we were put into break rooms, and these break rooms were not small groups, they were just pairs. And so it was just Dr. Radcliff and I consider that a God thing. It was terrific that he and I got to talk story there and get to know each other in that breakout room. And I was so impressed in our conversation that I approached him later on to see if he'd be willing to do this with me. And so Dr. Radcliff is the academic dean for the William E. Pannell Center for African American Church Studies and assistant professor of mission, theology, and culture at Fuller Seminary. Dr. Radcliff is also the founding and current pastor of the Message Center World Church in Gardena, California, in Southern California. Dr. Radcliff, thanks for joining us. It's so great to have you.
Absolutely, Gerald. My pleasure, man. I'm glad to be here. And you're right. That was one of those God moments where we just had a chance to kind of connect and talk and learn a little bit about each other. So I'm glad to be here with you.
Well, thanks. Thanks for joining us. Well, I want to begin by asking you, these past few months obviously have been very different than we've experienced in the past. And it's been quite intense, I'd say, for me at least. And I know for most others, it's been quite a difficult time. And so I wanted to begin by asking you, how are you doing in mind, heart, and spirit?
That's a loaded question, Gerald. My heart is heavy. It's really a difficult season to be a Black American. It's a difficult season to be a Black man in America. My heart is extremely heavy. By the time your viewers get a chance to check this out, we will probably hear some more stuff, but the Breonna Taylor indictment decision weighs heavy upon me. The fact that there has been no real transparency in that. And then you add to it George Floyd and a whole list of others. There's just a reality right now. So my heart is heavy. My mind is racing a bit, racing in from the perspective that I am teaching this quarter. So I'm teaching in the midst of everything else that's happening, in the midst of this, what's going to be completely a contentious political cycle, election cycle. So my mind is racing about what is my role? What is my role to my community? What is my role to our church? What is my role to the students that I teach? And then I guess that's my heart, my mind. My spirit is somewhat hopeful though. I just don't believe that in the midst of all of this that God is silent. I don't believe that God is complacent or silent. I do believe that there are ways we must and need to see the Spirit moving through the church, through the world, through our streets, our communities, our neighborhoods. So it's just a real big mixed bag of emotions, man. It's a bag of Skittles, I guess is what I'm feeling right now.
I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes I'm not sure what to do with everything that I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. And I have to always lean on my hope in Christ, like you, and hope and the good people around it. Yeah. So, before we get into some of these concerns, I'd like to ask if you could share with our congregation a little bit about yourself and your journey toward pastoring and teaching. but in particular, your deep and abiding interest in issues of justice and anti-racism.
Yeah. Wow. I know that we're going to get into some of this stuff a little bit down the road, so I don't want to jump ahead, but I do want to give a little bit of my story if we're doing some talking story. I was born Travis Air Force Base, which is here in kind of central northern California. My mom and dad were not married. They were both in the Air Force at the time, obviously. My mom relocated to the LA area pretty quickly. So I grew up in South LA. Some people call it South Central LA. I grew up there as a kid, as a young Black kid in the neighborhood. My mother is a great parent, great role model. My father was around, but I spent some weekends and holidays with him. But there's a whole thing there. Both my parents have in their own lives battled drug addiction. So as a young kid in South LA, I think there's some aspects of my narrative, some aspects of my story that would probably ring as what some people would assume to be a typical South LA upbringing for a young Black man. But there's, I guess if I had to put a handle on my journey, I would call it unconventional, in that I grew up in South LA, but my mother made sure that I got the best public school education that she could get me, which meant busing me out to other schools. And so I went to Paul Revere. I went to Brentwood Elementary, which is in the Brentwood, Westwood area. I went to Paul Revere Junior High School, which is in that same little Brent Westwood area. And I went to Palisades High School. All of those schools, when I first got there, were predominantly white schools. They were in very affluent neighborhoods, so you can imagine. So I was part of the busing program, kind of making sure that kids got the experience to go to other schools. Graduated school. I was always in gifted classes as a young kid, but I was a knucklehead. Didn't really want to apply myself, and that's what all my teachers said. He's brilliant, he's smart, but he won't apply himself. So kind of fooled around after high school. Went to a community college and got kind of stuck in the loop that a lot of people don't understand about how community colleges, and especially in urban centers, are crafted and created and what courses are offered, but it's kind of made to assist in the process of keeping students coming back and not necessarily matriculating and graduating. So I got kind of stuck in that. I went to work very early. I was working white collar, office gigs, administrative gigs all my life. I've been working. I'm maybe a few years after community college, I kind of sensed this call on my life, gave into what that call would be, but again, with this unconventional tagline or subtitle kind of running through the narrative. I thought the way that preaching and ministry and stuff worked was that your mom or your dad had to be a preacher, and they kind of magically passed that mantle down to you. And since my mother or father neither of them were preachers, I don't have any preachers anywhere in my family. There are no real other preachers in our family, in our immediate family or what have you. So I didn't know how that would work out. So kind of started submitting to this call to ministry, learning what ministry was, got married, started working for the sheriff's department. My wife was, at the time, was already working there. Then we started planting a church, man. There was some crazy stories about that too, how we came about actually planting the church. And then a couple years into the church plant, really felt this pressing need and desire from the Spirit that if I wanted to be a better pastor, I was going to have to go back to school. And I had done some local Bible college stuff. I had a degree from a local Bible college, but really going to school was a challenge for me. So I prayed about it and applied to a couple of places. I wanted to apply to Fuller, but I didn't feel I was qualified. I didn't have an accredited bachelor's degree, anything like that. So I was just really not sure how that was going to work out. My sister-in-law and my wife prayed for me and told me that I needed to do it. I did it. I interviewed with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ralph Watkins, who would go on to be a mentor and a deep, close friend of mine. He went to bat for me and helped me get in. And the full cycle of stuff is that I'm a late life theologian, late life academic, and I now sit in the seat in the position that Dr. Watkins held. So my life has kind of done this whole full circle thing. I never would have thought that I was going to be a professor, although many people early in my years said they saw it, I didn't see it. And I never thought I would have been a preacher or a pastor. So I walk in these realms, in these realities, and I wear it very loosely because I know it is a God-ordained thing. And so I'm constantly asking, you know, how am I supposed to navigate, and how am I supposed to maneuver? And I don't know what it's supposed to be my contribution in these spaces and places. That's kind of the long narrative. In between there, sprinkled in there, is a lot of interesting scenarios that I've had to deal with as a Black kid and as a Black man. I've experienced teachers. My mother has had to come to school and really go at it with teachers because of racist tendencies and statements that were being made. In my high school, during my high school year, there was a low-key race riot at the school. Some Klan supporters were putting stuff in people's lockers, and during a football game, some people found out, and it broke into a big deal. I've been pulled over police. I've had guns drawn on me. I live in neighborhoods where during 92 riots, I looked out my bedroom window, and the Foot Locker was about 5-6 blocks from my house. I could see the flames going up. I lived under that curfew. So I have, you know, kind of a unique lens and worldview on justice, on race relations, on the church. So I kind of bring all of those experiences, and I think that's probably, in a nutshell, a little bit about me, man. I love.
As you can tell, Dr. Radcliff has a little different background right now. We had to have him move to get a stronger Wi-Fi signal.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Well, thanks for hanging in there with us. So
working from home.
Yeah, we all have these things happen to us.
Yeah.
So Dwight, thank you so much for sharing about your background, and I would like to give you more time to talk about what's occurred to you in your life. And I remember hearing you in another interview recently, and something that you said in that interview really struck me at a visceral level, if I can use that term. You were responding to the question of what's like simply being a Black man in this country. And you said, there is still this fear that getting a traffic ticket might be my funeral. So what is it like really for you and your family? I know that you're married and you have 2 daughters. And what really is it like for all of you to be Black, simply being Black and being in this country?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would say, as I answer your question, I think the thing that I would like to really point out is that many white and non-Black populations, they sometimes feel as though that's a cop-out, or that's fake, that's phony, that's false news. You know, that's something only thugs and criminals feel. As a Black man who's never been arrested, I don't have a criminal record. I've worked in law enforcement. I've been a sheriff's deputy. I have 3 degrees. I am a seminary professor, a pastor, community leader. If I get in my car right now, all my registration is paid, my insurance is paid. That's never been an issue. But if I'm driving down the street, whether I'm with my wife or not, there is a very real sense that this could very easily go wrong and that I could die. My non-Black sisters and brothers, as we tend to have this conversation, that's something that really strikes home with them. So I'm not surprised that it was a visceral reaction for you. if you look at me, I'm not a very intimidating individual. I'm not the biggest guy. I'm not this big, strong, whatever, muscle bound or whatever. I'm usually dressed somewhat like this. So to look at me and to hear that someone, even with the certain levels of privilege that I have, socioeconomically and as a man, that still, when I leave the house, if I literally, when we finish this interview, I tell my wife I'm going to Sprouts or Whole Foods, if I'm gone for more than 20, 30 minutes, she's checking my location, and then she's calling or texting. It's not because my wife is afraid that I've run off, it's because that's the reality that we live in, that people that look like me, that look like my daughters, that look like my wife, are treated 100% differently. I don't need statistics to tell me this, although the statistics are there. I don't need videotaped evidence, although the evidence is there. I don't need testimony after testimony after testimony, although those testimonies are there. From my lived experience, I know that there has been an increase in the weaponization of Blackness, meaning that if you are Black, law enforcement, justice systems, doctors, the medical care, healthcare systems, there's an assumption made about you simply because of your Blackness. If it's in law enforcement, the assumption is that if you are Black, you are automatically a bad person. You automatically, it automatically needs, we automatically need more force to subdue you. You're automatically violent. You are animalistic in your rage. I remember watching and listening to the tape when the female police officer in Oklahoma shot and killed the gentleman as he got out of his car. And I heard the helicopter officer in the helicopter, as the man got out of his car, he said, "This looks like a bad dude." Now, in a helicopter from that distance, even with the technology, what was it about this man as he entered or exited his car that made him look like a bad dude? There was nothing that the helicopter officer saw other than he was Black and he was tall. So there's this automatic weaponization of my Blackness, that the fact that I'm Black automatically means you need more force. There's video after video after video of young white men walking around with weapons, open carry, and they are automatically, there's a way to talk them down. There's videos that have come out where white males are running around fighting with police officers, throwing things at police officers. I've seen videos of young white men pulling knives out, and that man is able to be tased or able to be talked down or able to be whatever. But when it comes to Blackness, it must be met with violent force. There's an automatic fear of my life and safety, which is the tagline that so many officers use. And please don't hear me saying all cops are bad. I'm not saying that. I know a lot of officers right now that I love dearly who are still serving in law enforcement. And if anything were to happen to them, it would break my heart. But there's this weaponization of Blackness. It's the reason why there's still disparities in our healthcare system. That when Black people report pain, it's not taken with the same seriousness as if my Asian brother or sister, or as if my white brother and sister reported pain. It's not treated the same. So to walk in my skin means that there are assumptions made about me, regardless of what I drive. I drive a decent car, a nice car. My wife drives a decent car. We live in a beautiful neighborhood, but there are assumptions made about me simply because I walk in the skin that I'm in. And those assumptions have negative ramifications, and they could literally cost me my life. Not because I've broken a law, not because I've done anything illegal, but simply because I look the way that I look. And so many of the cases that we've seen in the media for the last 5 to 7 years were people who were actually innocent, had not committed a crime, and still lost their life.
I heard I heard someone say that there's an automatic criminalization of the black body, and
Yes, sir.
that struck me too.
Yeah. Yeah. That to be black means you must have done something.
Well, you mentioned that you were a deputy, and I understand you were also chaplain with the sheriff's department in LA.
Yeah.
And
LA County.
yeah, so being a black man and having the background in law enforcement, you have a very unique perspective. And for a while, in the first few months of the pandemic, there was lots of conversation about defunding the police, and that sort of quieted down until you mentioned earlier in our conversation with what happened last weekend with the Breonna Taylor case. And so there's been more, a louder outcry again for defunding the police. And to be honest,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think most folks don't quite understand what that's about. And so I wonder if you'd share with us a little bit of your understanding and your perspective of what does it mean, defund the police?
Yeah. I don't want to necessarily throw commercials out there, but the Netflix documentary on the social dilemma is actually a pretty decent documentary. And the reason I bring it up right now is because it speaks to the polarization in our nation, that because of the way algorithms work, people are fed more of what they like and what they believe in. So as they begin to hear what they like and the opinions and the political opinions and the social opinions, as they are fed more of that, they are allowed to kind of dig in deeper and entrench themselves into positions without actually having to engage with robust dialogue and conversation with other people. Howard Thurman says that in order for hatred, in Jesus and the Disinherited, he says, in order for hatred to thrive and to grow, we just have to keep having contact without fellowship. That we have to keep bumping into each other. We have to keep being around each other, but without having deep intimacy and relationship and fellowship with each other. So I'll never know what it means to be Hawaiian or a Pacific Islander as long as I come into contact with people, but I never sit down at the table. We never break bread together, or we never have these talking dialogues. If we never do that, then there will be opportunity for hatred to grow and to thrive. And so what's happening right now is that we're having a conversation about defunding the police, and people are so entrenched in their Google filter bubbles about what defunding the police is about, that all they hear is the hate mongering and the volatile divisive speech. And so they either love it or hate it, but not everybody that loves it or hates it has the actual understanding of what's being called for and what's being asked for. Now, there are some extreme cases where people are like, no, get rid of police officers altogether. And I've got mixed opinions on that, about whether or not that can actually ever be done in a human society. I'd be willing to have some great conversation about that. But I think just the moderate conversation, a balanced conversation of what it means to defund the police. Most people are not saying we don't want police officers at all. What they're saying is it makes no sense, especially in Black communities. And I would throw in Black and brown communities, because so often the Black experience is parallel to and analogous to the brown experience in many ways. But in Black communities, the police respond to everything. So when many people are saying defund the police, what they're saying is, what would it look like to have social services, to have psychologically trained professionals responding to psychological issues? What would it mean to have just different people with different sets of expertise responding, instead of the police responding to everything, especially in Black communities where there's already a specific narrative and history of police? And this is where I really want us to be clear. And some people may dislike what I'm about to say, but I challenge you to do your own research and figure it out for yourself. What we don't recognize is that policing in the United States of America has a very specific history. There's a very specific narrative attached to policing to modern American policing. American policing is rooted in slave catching. That the first police forces were rooted in or grew out of or sprouted from slave catching, from going out and having to catch slaves that had run away and bring them back to their owners or punish them and brutalize them. So if we begin as a starting place that modern American policing was birthed out of this need to control, abuse, and reclaim Black bodies specifically, then what does it mean in a Black community that if you are having an issue with your child, or if you are having a psychological break, or if you are having an emotional issue, or if there's a problem with social services or welfare or education, what does it mean that the people who have historically been responsible for brutalizing you, for keeping you oppressed, enslaved, marginalized, and maimed in your physical bodies, what does it mean that that force, that representation is the first thing that you see that shows up at your doorstep? And even if you want to say that that history is so long that we can negate some of that, as a Black man in South LA, we can't unremember the Rampart scandal. We can't unremember in the LA County Sheriff's Department a group called the Stony Boys that were known for just grabbing Black kids and just beating the hell out of them. So these are not just, and even right now, today, this month, this week, the Sheriff's Department is under investigation for a gang in one of their stations where the initiation process is that you've got to kill a Black person. So what does it mean that the previous sheriff, Lee Baca, is in prison right now for trying to disrupt FBI investigations? So it's hard to step back and say, especially for somebody who's not Black, it's hard for me as a Black man to hear this conversation of, no, you don't know what you're talking about, when there are specific histories, there are specific experiences that are brought to the table. So if my child is gone missing, when I make a phone call, the first people to show up are people who have historically brutalized my people, my family, my ancestors, and even me as a kid. Those are the first people that show up. And you have to be honest and say that our white and most non-Black communities don't have that same history, don't have that same trauma. And so Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about post-traumatic slave disorder and how there is trauma that we are physically carrying in our bodies. And that when we need help or assistance, every time we need help or assistance, the people that have a history of brutalizing us are the people that show up. James Cone would say a whole bunch of things about the fact that we can't be free from them. That when we cry out for help, we're often told, lower your voice, don't talk like that, and we'll bring you your freedom after a while.
I think there's something to be said with regard to the protests that are happening. That, how else are your voices going to be heard? I mean, you've tried everything else, and nothing seems to break through, to the majority culture, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm careful, Gerald, even about having that conversation, because there are people, even in a previous interview, there were some people that did not like what I said. And what I said was basically this, that I'm tired of this Christian evangelical overarching condemnation of any protest that is not absolutely peaceful in nature. I have a problem with that overarching condemnation, because what it does in every thread that I've heard, in every conversation that I've had, it values property over life. And if that's the history and that's the narrative already, I don't know, if you look at the history of civilization, I don't know of a group of people who have ever achieved a level of freedom, full-fledged freedom, not just in theory, but in practice, and done it in a way that the oppressor has been okay with it. I don't know how you do that. That's number one. Number two, while I'm not for murder and mayhem, that's not my stance at all. I do feel as though it is biblically ignorant to say anybody who engages in any form of non-peaceful protest is not Christian. Because if I tell you, the city that I live in, they have an open market every Friday. If I tell you that somebody went down to the open market and they went down to this vendor and they went to the vendor and turned up the vendor's table and knocked down their tent, and then went to the vendor's cash register and threw their money everywhere, all over the floor, and destroyed their products. You would say that that's rioting, that's looting, that's vandalism. But when we say that it's Jesus in the book of John, all of a sudden now we've changed completely. So I just think that we've got to be more honest in having dialogue about how do oppressed and marginalized populations, if rioting is the language of the unheard, how do unheard, marginalized, and oppressed populations go about demanding their human dignity and respect in ways that are proper and respectful to the oppressor? And I just feel as though that's a bigger conversation that we need to get into. And with that said, again, I don't condone murder and mayhem, but I do believe that there are ways that aren't just kumbaya that need to be heard and need to be experienced by the larger civilization, by the larger culture.
Yeah, I would say that we have so much to learn, about all of this. I wonder if we can move directions a little bit. So the church that you pastor is in Gardena, California, and I know the area really well. There's a large Asian population there, and especially a large Japanese American population. And you had mentioned to me when we first talked that you try to educate your congregation about prejudice and bigotry that other, as you said, marginalized communities have had to face. So I wonder if you could share with us, how important is it that communities of color should stand in solidarity in the struggle for justice and equality and equity?
It's vital. As long as our Asian American brothers and sisters buy into the myth of the model minority, as long as they buy into the myth of minor feelings, of being quiet and silent and just kind of maneuvering without being honest about their own histories and their own heritages, it's easy to see that there are no points of connection and solidarity with the Black community. As long as we don't remember that Chinatown in San Francisco exists not as a tourist attraction, but it exists because at one point in American history, if you were of Chinese descent in that area, this was the only place you could legally live. As long as we look at the Santa Anita racetrack as just a horse racetrack, as long as we look at the city of Gardena and some of its Japanese heritage as just some of the aesthetics of the city, as long as we forget that Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants were rounded up like cattle, we're told, had notices placed on their homes saying, "We're coming back to take you and all your possessions." And they were placed in makeshift housing in camps in front of Santa Anita racetrack. As long as we forget that, then it's easy for our Chinese Americans and Japanese Americans specifically, and I'm just using those examples, to say that there's really no point of connection with the Black American experience. And as long as we only talk about race and anti-racism in binary code, that it's just a black-white dynamic, as long as we do that, then what it does is it allows the majority culture, whether inadvertently or purposely, to marginalize other marginalized groups. It takes this group of people that are marginalized and double marginalizes one group, because it allows them to have a narrative that isolates them from other marginalized groups. Now, I do believe that the Black experience in America is very specific and unique. I think that if you read Todd Boyd, Michael Eric Dyson, Ralph Watkins, if you read any of these scholars, James Cone, Imani Perry, if you read any of these scholars, they will tell you that the Black experience in America is very specific. There are some specific things that have happened to Black Americans, to Africans brought to this nation that is very specific. But issues of marginalization and oppression, we need to see points of solidarity with our brothers and sisters that allows us to stand together and not have something just be a Black issue. What happened with Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery, these are not just Black issues. They are very much Black issues, but there are repercussions to this, that if our other communities of color don't know how to stand in solidarity with us, that the Black-white binary is not necessarily the only paradigm where we talk about race and anti-racism in this country, but it is very much kind of the thermostat of race relations in the country. So I think that there are excellent points of solidarity, and I think that there are many communities that are trying to do that. I attended a rally in Leimert Park in LA. That was a rally for Asian American solidarity with Black lives. So it's happening. It's not always as publicized, but it's happening. Just like it's not known that during the LA 92 riots, that there were Korean American churches and Korean churches that held rallies to find out how they could stand in solidarity with their Black brothers and sisters. So it happens. We just need to do a better job of centering those conversations and putting the spotlight on those conversations and showing our other communities ways that we can stand in solidarity with each other.
Yeah, I've always felt that the idea of the model minority was a dominant culture way of putting wedges between marginalized communities. And
Yes,
I'm
sir.
really happy to know that so many of our younger Asian Americans now are much more attuned and aware of issues and much more involved. So I'm really happy about that. So, well, I want to ask one final question, and you know, we're as a church wanting to be more involved, more engaged, and more aware of anti-racism. So I want to ask you, you know, as you know, our church is located in a largely affluent area. So what would you say to us in becoming more equipped to be allies to communities of color, but in particular to the Black community as a church?
Yeah. This is kind of the magic bullet question that so many people are asking right now. And it would be so great if there was one magic bullet that we could package up and just send out to everybody. But the truth of the matter is that this is a multi-layered and multifaceted issue, and it will take multi-layered and multifaceted responses. So while I want to make sure I say that, I don't want to skirt the question. I do want to respond directly to the question, but I want to do that with the backdrop or with the caveat that there's not one or two things that you can do to change and make all the changes that you want to see. So one of the things that I think is key for churches who have small Black, African American, African diasporic populations, one of the key things that churches can do is begin to spark and create deep and meaningful relationships with other churches that have more vibrant Black populations. And I say the term the Black church very loosely, because whether or not the church is quote unquote all Black or just has a vibrant Black population or community inside of it, churches that are not need to foster and create meaningful relationships And I say that as responding and coming back to Howard Thurman's statement that part of the issue is that we have contact without fellowship. So part of the solution is that there must be fellowship, there must be intimacy, there must be relationship. So we've got to foster those relationships. Another thing that we've got to be doing, when I say we, I'm sorry, I mean you. One of the things that you all have to be doing is this right here. I love this handle that you're using of talking story, of being able to hear someone else's story. I think that as long as the Black narrative and the Black experience is just something kind of out there, something that you see every once in a while on the news, it's easy to dismiss it as media hype or as false news, fake news. I was watching another kind of quasi documentary, and there's this rapper who does a documentary, and in one session of his documentary, he goes to an all-white nursing home. Now, this is a Black rapper, young guy, and he goes to an all-white nursing home and does a rap show. It's hilarious, but he opens up with a barbershop quartet group, which kind of gets him in and gets the crowd at least open to hearing what he has to say. Afterwards, though, he sits and talks to several of the residents there. And as he talks to many of them, one lady begins to say this. She says, I like what you're doing and what you're saying. She said, but those Black people are just going to have to stop doing so much crime. So she goes on to say that it's the Black people, it's the Blacks that do all the crime. And he could not unconvince her of what she felt and believed. Now, we can go through statistical data to show that that's not true. We could go through statistical data to show that white on white, brown on brown, yellow on yellow, Black, you name a community, any community has crime against itself, every community. And if you are ignorant of the ways that cities are built and zoned, if you are ignorant of the fact that low income housing is a thing that cities develop and decide where it will be, that cities decide where public transportation will go through, how certain communities are broken up, what the rent and the values can be in certain places. If you don't understand that, if you don't understand that a certain amount of cocaine and the same amount of crack cocaine, that there are two different penalties for that. If you don't understand that there are other factors that also decide what is criminal, if we wave all that stuff away, then yeah, it's easy to say one group does this. But when you put all these things together and bring facts and data and history and reality, we just got to do a better job of hearing each other's stories, so that the stereotypical narratives that we're fed through the media and through our own filter bubbles and algorithms don't win over our common sense. And I've even had personally with a neighbor the same similar conversation, that just because that's what you see on the news doesn't mean that that's the reality. And it's crazy how we believe as a majority culture believes the narrative of angry Black men, but is silent or blind to the mass violence perpetrated by angry young white males. So I think there's a level of prejudice and bias that we just have to be honest about, and do the real work of sitting and listening to someone and allowing our worldview to be challenged, to be changed. And I think that that's really part of the work of the Spirit. And I guess part of why, coming full circle back to why my spirit is somewhat excited, is because I'm seeing that more and more. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know how much more we need to do, but I see that. So those are some of the things that we have to be doing. We have to be engaged in, and we have to be honest about having a conversation about white normativity. That to understand that this nation, that our systems were crafted to benefit certain groups, doesn't mean that everybody is evil. It's just, this is what we're dealing with. So how do we make it to apply to everybody? These are just deeper conversations that I think that we've got to have. I firmly believe that change doesn't happen because of a great podcast or a great sermon. I think it happens at coffee tables. I think it happens over coffee. over meals. That's where, to me, drastic change really happens.
Yeah, I thank you for that encouragement. I think conversations like this have to continue. And to be honest, I think we have to have a lot of uncomfortable conversations about these concerns
Yes, sir.
and issues. You know, it's because we ourselves, we live out here in a very comfortable environment. And I had mentioned to a friend of mine, growing up in Hawaii, everything that happened on the mainland or in foreign countries didn't apply to us because it seemed so far away. And not until moving to California did I
Mm.
realize that, you know, these experiences are happening to a lot of people, and it's important for us to know them and to know how we might be able to engage in them. So, well, Dwight, thank you
Yes, sir.
so much for your time with us today. I know that our congregation will gain a lot from our time together, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
I would love to. I would love to, brother. Again, it was a God moment that we were able to connect. So I'm just grateful to be able to sit here and share a little bit of my story.
Oh, thank you, Dwight. So, friends, thanks for tuning in today, and we hope that you'll join us again for other conversations, talking story with others. So, till next time, aloha and mahalo.